For 3 years.
I was the pulse of a dying machine, the invisible hand keeping a multi-million-dollar startup from imploding. When I finally mustered the courage to ask for the equity I had been promised, the CEO sent a laughing emoji and a message saying I was just a contractor. I didn't argue. I didn't cry. I simply smiled, finalized my exit for the morning of their massive IPO,
Sat back to watch their entire empire turn to ash.
grab your popcorn, because this is how you dismantle a house of cards from the inside. I'm Damien, and for 3 years,
You.
I was the guy behind the How to Exploitor developer startup. It started with a Craigslist ad that looked like a cry for help. Need coder 5 developers had quit before me, a red flag I should have seen from space.
But I was 24, broke, and drowning in students' loans.
I walked into a garage filled with 3 guys from Stanford who had expensive haircuts and zero common sense. Owen was the CEO,
Vicken.
a walking Instagram filter who thought disrupting vertical integration was a personality trait. Vicky, the CFO, had a shark-like smile and the unique ability to laugh at Owen's unfunny jokes precisely 2 seconds after he spoke.
Brett.
The CTO, who once asked me with a straight face if Python was a type of snake. I looked at their code and felt my soul leave my body. It was a nightmare of mismatched frameworks.
Variables named thingy final for real.
And comments like IDK, this seems to work, don't touch it. The site crashed every time someone sneezed. It was a car crash in slow motion, yet for some reason,
I decided to be the one to pull them out of the wreckage.
I spent the night fixing the database queries that were causing their server timeouts. By morning, Owen was hugging me, Vicky was crying, and Brett looked at me like it just invented fire. They offered me $55,000 on the spot. I should have asked for equity in writing. I should have demanded a contract.
Fusion.
But when you're staring at a bank balance of negative dollars, 55 grand sounds like a fortune. I took the job. My girlfriend, Kristen,
Furthermance was thrilled at first.
because she loved telling her friends her boyfriend worked at a promising startup. My best friend, Zach, a blow-color welder, who knew how the world worked, just shook his head.
Promising you.
A piece of someone else's pizza, Damien, he told me over a beer. Don't eat it. I ignored him, because I was young and foolish. The first year was a blur of heroics.
Fusion.
I saved their series a pitch from a total server meltdown, and for that, Owen took us to a steakhouse and gave a speech about my invaluable contribution. But that was the peak. Soon, 40-hour weeks became 80-hour grinds.
Bing.
I was deploying patches at 3 in the morning, while Owen was posting stories from a yoga retreat in Bali. I was debugging payment gateways on Christmas while they were at Coachella.
My health deteriorated.
My diet consisted of whatever the guy at the local 7-Eleven had on the shelves. His name was Lewis, the only person who seemed to care that I looked like a ghost.
My apartment became a place to store my clothes.
Kristen grew to despise the sight of my laptop. You care more about that code than you do about us, she said, storming out after I had to leave our anniversary dinner to fix a database lock. She was right, but I was blinded by the promises. Just wait for the Series B, Owen would say. Legal is handling the paperwork.
Vicky would lie.
Then came the day. I finally stood up for myself. I had been doing the job of 3 engineers for 3 years, and I was tired of the empty promises. I walked into Allison's office,
ready to collect what I had earned.
I showed him my contributions, the code I built, the fires I put out. I asked for my equity. Owen didn't even look up from his phone. He sent a text to my Slack.
Emoji.
And the words, Damien, you're just a contractor, get back to work. In that moment, everything snapped into focus. I realized I wasn't an employee. I was a hostage.
Fate.
I spent the next 3 months planning my departure, but I didn't just quit. I made sure that when I left, I took the entire foundation of the company with me.
Houston.
They had built their entire infrastructure on a private repository that I had quietly optimized for my own proprietary workflows. The night before the IPO, the office was buzzing. They were all popping champagne,
preparing for their big payout.
I sat at my desk, finished my final deploy, and then I executed a script that triggered a massive, irreversible data migration. I didn't delete anything,
Thank you.
but I completely restricted access to the core database keys and reorganized the entire directory structure into an encrypted labyrinth only I could navigate. I set an autoplay for the company email address. Then,
You.
I walked out the front door. By the time the IPO started, the site was offline. The dashboard was a blank screen. The investors were panicking, and the board members were screaming for answers.
Thinged. Owen called me 40 times in an hour.
I finally picked up. Damien, the site is down. What the hell is happening? He shrieked. I just listened to the sound of his panic for a moment. Oh, the site? I asked.
You knowin'. Calm as the ocean.
I think you're confused. I'm just a contractor and my contract ended this morning. I hung up, blocked his number, and turned my phone off. 3 hours later, the IPO was canceled.
Vroom did.
The company's valuation dropped to zero before the market even closed. I didn't need the money. They promised me. I had already built a freelance consulting firm during my spare time,
Ticked.
and I was already working with a client that valued my skill. 2 weeks later, I ran into Zach at his shop. He didn't have to ask. He just handed me a beer, clinked his bottle against mine, and said, I told you,
Vic.
man, don't eat the pizza. Justice isn't always about winning in court. Sometimes, justice is just watching the people who thought they were smarter than you realize exactly how much they needed you.
Theme.
I walked away with my integrity, my freedom, and the satisfaction of knowing that I was the one who pulled the plug. And honestly, I've never slept better. The screen glowed with the cold,
Eat.
blue light of lines of code that kept their empire standing. My name is Lewis, and for 3 years I was the ghost in the machine of a startup that everyone thought was going to be the next big thing.
Empty.
They called me the code guy behind my back in private Slack channels while in public. I was just Ghost, an invisible hand fixing bugs while they took the bows. Every time I suggested a structural improvement,
Thinky.
Vicky would flash that condescending, fake sweet smile and tap my shoulder. Just keep the site running, sweetie, shed chirp, as if my only function was to be an automated server maintenance bot.
Ving.
Brett was even worse. He treated my work like a ready-made gift he'd bought off the shelf. He'd stand in front of investors, puffing out his chest.
You.
Describing complex database optimizations as if he'd personally written the logic while I was sitting 2 feet away. Literally patching the errors in his presentation. Slides in real time.
You.
I actually kept a mental tally of every time they claimed credit for my sleepless nights. I stopped counting after the 30th time. The day I realized I wasn't just an employee, I was a prop in their theater of lies.
Thinged.
Watching Brett present was like watching someone claim they'd painted the Sistine Chapel while Michelangelo was standing right there. Paint on his apron and brush still wet in his hand, but Owen, the CEO,
Ing.
was the architect of my misery. Everything was about his vision, his legacy, and his world-class team. I was a team of one, living in a studio apartment that smelled like stale pepperoni and broken dreams.
Feud.
While he talked about us like we were a sprawling corporate powerhouse, my life outside the terminal was decaying just as fast. Kristen, my girlfriend, began drifting away, always coming home late,
Rumble.
claiming she was managing some high-profile gala or event. I was too buried in server logs to see the obvious signs that everyone else, including my friend Zach, seemed to notice.
Fax would send me cryptic texts tasking.
If I'd seen Kristen at this place or that place, while I foolishly insisted she was just working hard. Then came that Friday, a night etched into my memory like acid on glass.
Finished.
The deployment early. The servers were finally stable. And I walked through my front door hoping to surprise her. Instead, I found her on the couch with a guy named Prieston,
Fijix.
moving with a rhythm that left no room for doubt. She didn't even flinch when she saw me. She just rolled her eyes with an air of profound annoyance. You're never here, Lewis, she snapped, smoothing her hair.
Pathetic startup over me every single day.
And this is exactly why Prieston and I connected. Prieston looked like he wanted to vanish into the upholstery, but I stopped him.
Faked it.
So you blame me for your betrayal because I was working to build a future for us, I asked, watching the sheer arrogance of her justification. She stood up tall and self-righteous, as if she were the martyr in this narrative. Freeston makes time for me, he shows up, he's successful. And he doesn't worship. A screen, she spat. I didn't yell. I didn't throw a punch. I started to laugh, a hollow, jagged sound that filled the room. You're right, Kristen,
Rem.
I said, my voice cold and steety. I do need to figure out my priorities, and you are officially at the bottom of the list. I told them to enjoy the apartment, grabbed my laptop and a duffel bag,
Fission.
and walked out the door without looking back. The look of confusion on their face, the loss of the target they wanted to hurt, was worth every second of those wasted years. I crashed at Zach's place, and the next day,
Finn was out. I cleared out my life.
Zach handed me a beer, his eyes filled with a mix of pity and fury. You gonna be okay, he asked. Eventually, I replied, staring at my laptop. Right now.
Focus on the one thing they still owe Memi equity.
Zach just shook his head, knowing exactly what was coming. Whatever you say, man, but when the whole thing blows up,
Thing you.
call me, I've got a shovel and ready to bury the evidence. He didn't know how right he was. The IPO announcement hit on a Tuesday, and the company was valued at a staggering $600 million. My 1% share,
Thumb.
the promise they'd whispered to me for 3 years, was worth $6 million. I sat there in my dark room, calculating the math, feeling a strange sense of vindication. I messaged Owen on Slack,
Things.
my heart hammering against my ribs. Hey, just wanted to finalize the equity transfer before the IPO hits. I typed dot, 3 dots appeared, hovered, and then vanished. Then they appeared again. And then,
He sent a single laughing emoji, followed by,
bro, you were never an employee. You're a 1999 contractor. No equity for contract as standard stuff. I stared at the screen until the words blurred. 3 years of 80-hour weeks, no benefits, no overtime, just a flat $55,000 a year. And he had the audacity to call it standard. Everything snapped into focus.
Buren.
I realized then that I hadn't been building a company. I had been the product they mined until the gold was gone. But they forgot one crucial detail. I was the one who built the infrastructure.
Thing.
I was the one who wrote the code that connected the entire platform, and I was the only one who knew about the kill switch. ID hard-coded during those long, lonely nights when they were busy taking credit for my genius.
Fingen.
As they prepared to go public, I opened my terminal. The cursor blinked, waiting for the command that would turn their $600 million valuation into a digital graveyard.
Justice isn't always found in a courtroom.
Sometimes. It's found in a single line of code, pressed by the man they thought was too insignificant to matter. I hit enter, and the screen went black. The party had just started for them, but for me.
Fent.
The silence that followed was the sweetest sound I had ever heard. The office was buzzing with that artificial, hollow energy that only happens right before a disaster. Kristen looked at me with that patronizing, thickeningly sweet smile, the kind that reminded me exactly where I stood, in the pecking order, the very bottom. Every time Brett took credit for my architecture, he wasn't just stealing work. He was stripping away my dignity.
For 3 long years.
I let him, mostly because the lie was easier to swallow than the truth.
You've been played for 3 years.
Isn't just an inconvenience, it's a soul-crushing realization that you aren't the genius you thought you were. Owen, the CEO, sat at the head of the table,
Fusion.
treating the destruction of my career like a mere business transaction. The next day, the bonus announcement was held in the main office, a ritual of humiliation dressed up as corporate culture.
Fuji.
Owen walked around with a stack of envelopes, handing them out like he was bestowing a royal decree, and when he reached me, he dropped a pathetic, thin envelope on my desk. It contained a $300 check and a gift card to a local pizza joint, a slap in the face that tasted like cardboard. Owen stood at the front of the room,
Being a nauseating speech about how
everyone contributed to this massive success, his eyes sliding right over me, as if I were a piece of office furniture. Vicky, his right-hand sycophant,
Fixty.
toasted the team with a glass of cheap champagne, and Brett, like a broken record, repeated her every word 3 seconds later. I sat there, staring at that check,
Fusenet.
realizing the math of my life had been reduced to a cruel equation. 3 years of my youth, roughly 7,000 hours of unpaid overtime, yielded a bonus that didn't even cover my grocery bill.
Isn't.
I had been worth less to them than the electricity it took to keep their fragile servers running, yet there I was, surrounded by their pathetic celebratory pizza. That night,
Sleep was a luxury.
I couldn't afford my mind was a loop of Kristen telling me I was a workaholic, that I'd wasted my prime chasing a phantom dream. Then, a cold, sharp clarity washed over me,
You.
and I opened my laptop to look at the code lifeblood of their company. Every module, every critical function, every piece of logic that kept their platform from imploding it was all mine.
You.
And it was held together by nothing more than my constant invisible maintenance. They were running on technical debt, a ticking time bomb of rushed patches and sloppy shortcuts that I had been begging them to fix for years.
Fused.
Choosing short-term speed over long-term stability, and now that arrogance was going to be their undoing. The IPO was scheduled for Monday,
Function.
the grand stage where Owen would finally pancreatic attack God in front of the world. I spent the weekend documenting every penitency, every fragile integration
On every single point of failure.
that I had been papering over for years. On Sunday night, I sent a simple text to Zach. Remember that shovel you mentioned, say when? His reply was chillingly brief.
Being to be bad.
Dot. Depends on your definition of bad. I wrote back. Monday morning, I made coffee, sat on my couch, and watched CNBC as the clock ticked toward the opening bell. There was Owen,
Gross nut.
standing on the floor of the stock exchange in a suit that cost more than my first car, radiating a smug, unearned pride. The reporter asked him about their engineering excellence,
Fusin.
boasted about their best-in-class team, and innovative, world-class solutions. I laughed because I was the team, and our solutions were essentially digital duct tape, holding up a collapsing building at exactly 9:30 a.m.
Confetti fell.
The stock opened at $52, and in that same moment, I sent my resignation. A mail effective immediately. I didn't give notice. I didn't offer a transition. I simply vanished into the digital ether.
First tremors began.
Endpoints started timing out, and database queries began to crawl as if they were wading through mud. By 10:00 a.m., the cascading failures began the checkout flow. The core engine,
Towards all of it began to unravel.
with a spectacular, terrifying speed. It was death by 1,000 paper cuts,
The inevitable consequence of
every shortcut they had demanded, and every well-fix-it later lie they had told. I watched the stock ticker on my phone begin its descent. 52, 50, 48, 46.
the NBC host.
Looked visibly confused as Owen's expression shifted from triumph to pure, unadulterated panic, his phone undoubtedly lighting up with furious calls from the board. They're world-class engineers,
Fact.
the ones with the Ivy League degrees who were supposed to make me redundant, were completely lost in the wreckage. They were staring at my code, trying to decipher a map they weren't qualified to read.
Fuse while the system burnt to the ground around them. Dot.
Twitter exploded with screenshots of error codes. Tech journalists were frantic with theories of cyber warfare, and the market reacted with ruthless efficiency.
Fume.
By the time the closing bell rang, they had hemorrhaged $40 million in valuation, a massive, public failure that turned their coronation into a funeral. I turned off the television, opened my laptop,
Fenty.
and saw 17 missed calls from Owen and Vicky. The texts poured in, starting with begging for my help, moving to frantic accusations, and ending with hysterical claims that I was destroying everything they had built.
Bing.
I didn't answer a single one justice. Isn't a conversation, it's a consequence. The stock eventually stabilized once they threw enough money at consultants to perform a band-aid job, but the damage to their reputation was permanent.
Fume.
Investors were running for the exits, and the narrative had shifted from tech genius to technical incompetence. Owen started telling everyone that I was a disgruntled contractor who had sabotaged them, but he was wrong.
Binged.
I hadn't sabotaged them at all. I had simply stopped pretending that their company was anything other than what they had built. A house of cards. I poured myself a drink, toasted to the screen, and finally
For the first time in 3 years, I felt entirely, perfectly free.
This is a narrative script tailored for a high-retention YouTube storytelling channel. They told everyone I was a disgruntled,
Vint.
amateur developer who abandoned ship right before the company's biggest moment. They claimed I had sabotaged their systems on purpose, a pathetic attempt to frame me for their own catastrophic incompetence.
Here is the irony. I didn't break anything.
I simply stopped fixing the disasters they created. I stopped being the invisible ghost in the machine, the safety net for their crumbling house of cards. And let me tell you,
Thing.
watching their multi-million-dollar empire collapse in real time was the sweetest thing I have ever witnessed. My name is Lewis. For 3 years, I worked for a high-profile Silicon Valley startup. The founders, Owen and Vicky,
Of the Visionary Act.
they sold dreams of equity, IPOs, and early retirement to anyone gullible enough to listen. I was the code guy from community college to them. I was just a line item on a budget,
Spendable resource that didn't know the difference between a promise and a contract.
but they forgot one thing. I am a developer. I don't just write code, I track data. Every single day for 3 years, I took screenshots.
Feeble.
Every Slack message, every shady email, every meeting where they laughed about cheating investors and screwing over employees. I organized them all into a master folder on my private cloud. I titled it Insurance.
Tuesday night.
My friend, Zach, sat across from me on the floor, surrounded by takeout boxes and half-empty bottles. On my monitors, 3 years of my life were being laid out in a cold, hard timeline.
You're really going to trigger this, aren't you?
Zach asked, shaking his head. I didn't answer. I pointed to a specific thread from 6 months before their planned IPO. Owen had sent a message to Vicky.
If you just keep him thinking he'll get
Equity by the time we IPO, it won't matter. He's just a community college kid. He won't lawyer up. Vicky's reply was even worse. Honestly, I'm surprised how much hell do for basically nothing.
the best hire we've ever made, just don't put anything.
In writing, Brett, their golden boy manager, chimed in with, exactly, as long as he doesn't ask for a contract, we're good. Zach whistled, his face turning pale.
People aren't just greedy.
He whispered. They're stupid. They aren't stupid, I replied, my voice steady. They're just arrogant. I reached out to Casey, a veteran investigative journalist at a top-tier tech publication.
He was skeptical at first.
Everyone thinks they have a story, Lewis. She told me over the phone. Why should I trust yours? Because I have the metadata.
Fact.
The skepticism in her voice vanished once the documents arrived in her inbox. By Wednesday morning, the silence from Owen and Vicky had been replaced by a deafening roar of notifications. My phone didn't stop vibrating.
Bum started.
With hey, let's talk, moved to, you're ruining everything, and ended with we have lawyers. I didn't reply to a single word. By Thursday, the company released a public statement
Officially painted me
as a disgruntled contractor who had sabotaged their server infrastructure. My LinkedIn profile was flooded with hate. Recruiters stopped calling. My career,
Fengston.
the thing I had worked for every hour of every day for years, was being burned to the ground by people who didn't even know how to write a simple script. Then, I got a text from my ex, Kristen.
Thaw the news.
I always knew you were the problem, Preston, and I are praying for you.
Lol.
I looked at the screen, felt a cold, sharp calm wash over me, and hit the block button. I didn't care about their public image.
For the truth to hit the public.
2 weeks later, the article went live. The headline was exactly what I wanted. IPO Day, Chaos Labor Violates, and lies at startup name. Casey hadn't just used my story.
Viewed.
She had found Caleb, employee number 4. Caleb had been fired 2 weeks before the company's first major funding round because he dared to ask for the equity he was promised. Then she found 2 other developers,
Fushi.
both treated with the exact same cycle of abuse. The article hit the tech world like a shockwave, but the real twist wasn't the article itself. It was the follow-up.
Fengston.
Someone inside the company Somian who had finally had enough recorded a board meeting. In the audio, Vicky was heard laughing, calling me a bitter little man who couldn't handle the pressure. He didn't know the recording was being sent directly to Casey's inbox. The fallout was instant. Investors pulled their funding within 48 hours of the audio going public. The IPO, the big moment they had been chasing,
He was canceled indefinitely.
Owen and Vicky were forced out by the board. I didn't lose my career. In fact, I started getting calls from companies that actually value transparency. Last week,
Fished.
I saw a post on Reddit about that company. It was officially bankrupt, their systems in shambles, because the only person who knew how to keep them running was sitting on his couch watching them fall.
Justice doesn't always happen in a courtroom.
Sometimes it happens in a folder labeled insurance, and sometimes the best way to win is to simply stop playing their game sob loose, and finally done.
They say.
In Silicon Valley, you're either the disruptor or the one being disrupted. I never expected to be the one they'd try to erase from existence. 3 years of my life, thousands of hours of unpaid code,
Vigdeen.
all boiled down to a $15 million lawsuit because I dared to speak the truth. They thought I was just a tired developer who would wither away under the pressure.
When you take everything from a man, he has nothing left to fear.
It started with a whisper in a meeting. Vicky, the coup, stood there smiling that cold.
Peace.
Corporate Smiland told the entire room I was bitter. She called me unfit for a growth environment. A recording of that meeting found its way to Casey, a journalist who had been digging into the startup's messy IPO.
Victor.
Then came the public hit. Brett, the CEO, went on record saying they had given me every opportunity to succeed. It was a masterclass in gaslighting. They didn't stop at character assassination.
Few.
Their legal team started firing off aggressive letters, threatening defamation suits. That was when the adrenaline turned to ice in my veins. I knew I couldn't fight this with rage alone. I needed a professional.
Found Billy Pearson.
A lawyer with a face like an old stone wall and an office that smelled of dusty law books and resolve. I walked in with boxes of evidence-to-Slack logs, emails, code timestamps.
Fade it.
Billy leaned back in his chair, his eyes scanning the documents. He didn't flinch. Even when I showed him the private messages from Owen the ones, where he'd promised me the moon and the stars, only to deliver a knife in the back.
Defamation threat is noise,
Billy said. But they're looking for a way to use the computer. Fraud and abuse act against you. My stomach dropped. I just resigned, Billy, I whispered. I know, he replied, his voice steady.
You.
But they lost millions on IPO Day, their wounded animals, and wounded animals bite. Billy looked at me, a flicker of something close to a smirk appearing. We aren't just going to defend you, we're going to countersue.
3 years of massive unpaid overtime
was a goldmine for us. Wage theft, fraudulent inducement, unjust enrichment. They picked the wrong developer, he said. I felt a tiny spark of hope. Maybe,
just maybe,
the tide was turning. The lawsuit arrived via FedEx 2 weeks later. 40 pages of legalese, demanding $15 million. I was a guy living in a studio apartment.
Wanted to ruin my entire future.
Then, the harassment started. My address leaked on a forum. Pizza deliveries I didn't order arrived at midnight.
Theme.
My landlord received calls from strangers, claiming I was running an illegal operation. It was psychological warfare. I had to move into my friend Zach's spare room, terrified every time a car pulled up on the street.
Yisham.
The hearing for their restraining order felt like a funeral for my freedom. Their lawyers painted me as a tech terrorist. Billy stood up, adjusted his tie, and presented the First Amendment argument with surgical precision. That truth wasn't defamation. The judge didn't just deny their request. To silence me, he narrowed it down so far it rendered their motion useless. I had won the right to keep talking, but the victory felt hollow.
Thanks.
I was still broke, still being hunted, and the legal bills were mounting like a tidal wave. Watching Owen on financial news shows was the hardest part. He played the victim in 5,000 suits, talking about trust and betrayal.
You.
The world was applauding his integrity while he was burning mine to the ground. I felt the weight of my parents' disappointment, the shame of being the guy who got fired and sued by a unicorn startup.
Vet.
I sat on the floor of Zach's apartment, staring at the ceiling, wondering if I had anything left to hold on to.
Dot. Month 4.
Dot. The depositions began as Billy started presenting the internal Slack logs during discovery.
Fence's confidence crumbled.
The documents didn't lie. They're messagist ones where they openly mocked the investors and plotted to hide the financial state of the company. Were now part of the public record.
Fair.
The lawyers for the startup stopped being aggressive and started being desperate. Billy turned to me during a break, his expression unreadable. They want to talk settlement, he said. They realize that if this goes to trial,
Things eat.
their stock isn't the only thing that's going to crash. It wasn't a movie ending with confetti. It was a long, brutal process that forced them to admit they had breached my contract.
For a check, they cut me.
Wasn't just for the back wages, it was enough to clear my debts and give me the fresh start I needed. I didn't become a billionaire, but I kept my integrity. I watched the news a few months later.
Fakey.
Alan and Vicky were forced out by the board as the management issues came to light. The tech industry is small, and once you have shown your true colors, even a high-priced peer firm can't hide the stain.
Fact.
I learned one thing throughout this nightmare. They rely on the fact that you'll be too scared to fight back. They bank on your silence. But when you finally find the courage to stand up,
Their power was only as big as your fear.
don't let them silence you. Justice takes time, but it's worth every single second. If you've ever had a boss try to crush your future,
You want to hear your story in the comments. You aren't alone. Subscribe for more.
the clock on the wall was mocking me, ticking away seconds that felt like hours here in France. My life had become a series of legal filings,
Sleepless nights.
and the crushing weight of a multi-million-dollar lawsuit hanging over my head. Every single day was a battle against a system that seemed designed to drain me dry. Billy, my lawyer, kept telling me to hold on.
But my bank account was screaming for mercy.
Between the mounting legal fees and the absolute impossibility of finding a job while labeled as a troublemaker in the tech world, I was drowning. Then,
First settlement offer arrived from Owen's legal team. $25,000.
that was the price they put on my dignity and the years of my life I had poured into their failing vision.
Injured.
They wanted me to sign a comprehensive NDA and vanish into the shadows for pocket change. Billy just laughed when he saw the document, his eyes narrowing as he grabbed his notepad. We weren't just going to refuse, we were going to force them to look at the reality of their own greed. We're countering with everything, he said, his voice steady. Saz, I'm adding the back pay calculations for those 90-hour weeks.
You.
The math was brutal, showing over $280,000 in unpaid overtime alone. California law was finally on my side, and we intended to make them regret every illegal shortcut they had taken. Following months were a blur of hostility, back-and-forth emails, and the constant threat of SC investigations. Their lawyer, Monica, was a master of the dance. She started with insulting lowball offers,
Vision.
then pivoted to claiming my damages were inflated. She tried to imply that we were both just reasonable people who wanted to move on, suggesting that a fight would only cost more than the payout. It was a cold,
Calculated performance.
and we both knew every single step of the routine. Meanwhile, Casey's follow-up article hit the press, exposing the rot within the tech startup culture. It didn't name me explicitly,
You.
but the industry
Does it-
knew exactly who it was about. The pressure on Owen's company was mounting, and their stock price was bleeding out. The board finally put Owen on leave,
Fiend.
a convenient arrangement where he sat at home collecting checks while his puppets. Vicky and Brett scrambled to stop the ship from sinking. Right in the middle of the chaos, a LinkedIn notification blinked on my screen.
It was Earl.
An engineering lead from a competing firm. He had seen the reports and wanted to talk about contract work. I was skeptical, but Billy told me to just keep my mouth shut and don't sign a single thing.
Thinged.
Earl met me at a local coffee shop, bypassing the drama and asking sharp, technical questions about my previous projects. He wasn't looking for a scapegoat, he was looking for a builder. For the first time in months,
Felt like a professional human being again.
The negotiations with Owen's team, however, remained a war of attrition. They offered 85,000. We countered at 375.
325.
We dropped to 325. It was like an auction in hell, with my life hanging in the balance. 6 months after the nightmare began, we finally sat down for formal mediation.
Victim.
The neutral law office felt sterile, but the tension was thick enough to cut. Their board member sat across from us, looking like he'd rather be anywhere else on the planet. Billy laid out every piece of evidence, every desperate email where I warned them about the systems failing, every Slack message where they had dismissed my warnings with arrogance, the timesheets, the holiday work logs, and the cold, hard proof that I had been lied to about equity. The board member's face turned pale when he saw the records of Owen promising me shares that never existed. Monica shifted tactics, realizing the ship was taking on water.
Back.
They finally floated 185,000 with a promise of mutual silence. Billy didn't blink. He countered at 315,000.
Ephesians.
With strict language that allowed me to speak about industry practices without ever naming them. He demanded a written acknowledgement that this was a settlement, not an admission of fault on my part. They took a break, whispering in the hallway, desperate to extract one last favor, a technical handoff. Billy agreed to a limited session, documented, controlled, and final. Hours bled into more hours. Coffee cups piled up like tombstones, and the whiteboard was covered in red ink. We finally landed on $275,000. The paperwork was a nightmare of legalese, but when I finally signed, the silence in the room was deafening.
Use that.
The technical handoff happened the following week. 8 hours of watching their engineers struggle to understand the architecture I had built from scratch. One of them looked at me, genuinely humbled,
Bend.
and admitted the code was far more complex than management had ever led them to believe. I didn't brag. I just showed them how to turn off the lights. When I closed my laptop, that chapter of my life finally slammed shut.
Ease money.
The money hit my account 10 days later. After taxes and paying Billy, I was left with $165,000. It wasn't the millions I had been promised, but it was enough to breathe.
Binged.
It was enough to rent an apartment with real furniture and stop living out of a suitcase. Most importantly, it was enough to prove that I wasn't just a disposable resource. Earl kept his word, and the job offer came through. The work was clean, the boundaries were clearly defined, and my hours were actually respected. When Earl asked me to work a weekend early on, I instinctively started to say yes out of habit. Then I stopped.
I told him Monday would be better.
He just said, "Sounds good," and that was the end of it. No guilt, no passive-aggressive comments about not being a team player. Just work. Owen resigned shortly after the settlement,
Sissy.
moving on to another startup, as if nothing had ever happened.
Not.
Guys like him always land on their feet. They are masters of failing upward. But the company never quite recovered, its stock stagnating while the industry moved on.
Fusat.
I still have every piece of documentation tucked away in a safe deposit box. Not because I want to use it, but because for the first time in a long time, I finally feel in control of my own story.
Front.
The stock price finally leveled off at $38, a modest finish to a saga that had felt like a descent into madness. Everyone else seemed to simply move on, as if the chaos had been nothing more than a bad dream.
Peopled.
Billy had pulled me aside on my final day, his voice grave, and insisted that I archive every single shred of documentation I possessed. I took his advice to heart,
UAs.
renting a secure, safe deposit box to house the evidence of the company's toxicity. 4 months into my new role with Earl, he pulled me into his office, offering a contract extension and a significant raise.
Ian.
The work here was undeniably dull, a far cry from the adrenaline-fueled impossible coding marathons we used to pull at 2 in the morning. There were no midnight fires to fight, just standard development, routine code reviews,
Predictable hum of enterprise infrastructure.
but for the first time in years, I realized that boring was a blessing in disguise. Boring meant stability.
Ancient.
and stability meant I could finally reclaim my weekends without the threat of a system crash looming over my head. Recruiters began sliding into my inbox with actual, legitimate offers from established companies.
Thankenst.
I became incredibly selective, swatting away any pitch that dared to use words like disruption, equity, or changing the world. I had been down that road, survived the lawsuit, and learned the most expensive lesson of my life.
Team.
Then, 8 months after the dust had finally settled, I was sitting in a quiet coffee shop near my new apartment, minding my own business. That was when the world decided to tilt on its axis again.
Ver.
Someone pulled out the chair directly across from me, and the sound of the wooden legs scraping against the floor made me look up. It was Kristen. It was the first time I had laid eyes on her since our brutal breakup,
Feel.
and she looked fundamentally different. She seemed weary, the sharp edge of her usual confidence replaced by a hollow exhaustion. "Hi," she whispered, her voice barely audible over the hum of the espresso machine.
And sure, if you'd still be coming to this place.
She shifted in her seat, looking visibly uncomfortable, as if she didn't know how to carry her own body. "I saw the news about the settlement," she continued,
Think.
her eyes darting away from mine. "I heard what they did to you, and I wanted to say I'm sorry for how everything fell apart." I didn't offer a response,
Things at him.
waiting to see where this pathetic attempt at reconciliation was going. "Preston and I broke up," she added, a bitter smile tugging at the corner of her mouth. "Turns out,
Mew.
he was seeing—"
Other people the entire time we were together.
She let out a dry, forced laugh that sounded like glass breaking in a quiet room. I suppose I should have seen that coming from a mile away. I remained silent,
V.
watching the way her hands trembled as she tucked a loose strand of hair behind her ear. "I've been doing a lot of thinking lately," she said, leaning in, her eyes attempting to project that old vulnerability. "About us.
Victi.
About how maybe I was just too hard on you when things got difficult. You were trying to build something massive, and I suppose I just didn't get it." She looked at me with those familiar eyes.
Ving.
"The ones that used to make me believe in a future I didn't deserve. Maybe we could try again." I took a slow, deliberate sip of my coffee, looking at her not as a lover, but as a stranger who had caused irreparable damage.
Izep.
I saw the woman who had cheated on me, blamed me for her own infidelity, and called me a failure while I was drowning. I remembered the cruel texts she sent during the darkest hour of my life,
Fusion.
the ones where she boasted that Preston was praying for my career to implode. Karma is a cruel mistress, but today, she was sitting right in front of me. I looked Kristen directly in the eyes and offered a polite,
Smile.
"No, Kristen, absolutely not." Her expression shifted from hope to shock in a heartbeat. "What do you mean, no? We were good once." I calmly closed my laptop,
Eel.
the click of the lid echoing like a gavel in the small space. "You cheated on me, blamed me for it, and then mocked me when I was at my absolute lowest. What in the world makes you think I'd ever want you back in my life?"
That.
she stammered, her voice rising in desperation.
I've been through a lot. And.
"Don't," I interrupted, my voice cold and steady. "This is genuinely pathetic,
Fennant.
and I don't even want to hear the rest of your script." Tears finally welled up in her eyes, a final attempt to manipulate the situation. "I made mistakes." "Yes, but you did too. You were never home."
You were always obsessed with the code.
"You're right," I replied, standing up to leave. "I did make mistakes. I trusted the wrong people, and I put my faith in the wrong partner." "You're being incredibly cruel," she spat.
Feud. The mask of remorse finally slipping off.
"No, Kristen finally being honest, and there's a world of difference between the two." I turned to walk away, then paused.
Thought occurring to me that felt like the final piece of a puzzle.
"Oh, and by the way," I turned back to face her, her face pale as a ghost. "I was going to propose to you. I had the ring and the speech ready to go.
UV.
I am so grateful that I found out exactly what kind of person you were before I made that life-altering mistake." Her breath hitched, and she looked as if the air had been vacuumed out of the room. "Really?" she whispered. "Yeah," I said, offering a final genuine nod. "Thank God. I dodged that bullet." I walked out of the coffee shop without looking back, the cool air hitting my face like a baptism. I got into my car, started the engine,
Bang.
and drove away from the wreckage of my past. 10 months after the IPO disaster, I had a decent apartment, a stable career, and money in the bank. Life was finally peaceful.
Vowed.
That I would protect this serenity at any cost.
Tell my boyfriend I'm single this weekend, Vegas edition.
My girlfriend whispered these words, her voice dripping with alcohol and arrogance, while live streaming herself, locked in a passionate embrace with a stranger.
You.
I stood there in my hotel room in Denver, the silence deafening. I didn't scream. I didn't blow up her phone. I didn't lose my mind. I simply opened my laptop, accessed the airline portal, and canceled her flight home. Then,
Fusat. I watched the fallout begin.
by Monday, the private group chat she shared with her friends Grace, Aurora, and Baka would be leaked to me, revealing a betrayal far deeper than a drunken night. Hey Reddit!
Get into the details.
My name is Cole, and for 30 years I've been an aviation safety inspector. My life is built on discipline and staying calm when the engine fails or the wings start to wobble. When a crisis hits,
Panic. You follow the protocol.
I've been with Cecilia for 4 years, living in a quiet, organized apartment. I thought we were a team, building a life toward a future we both wanted.
Failed to see the cracks forming underneath the surface.
I didn't notice that Cecilia needed social media validation, like a starving person needs food. Her friends were no better. Grace was the orchestrator,
Thing.
a woman who hid her cruelty behind empowerment buzzwords. Aurora was the curator, filming her life as if it were a movie, and she was the main character. And Becca, well,
Iggy.
she was just the shadow that followed, wherever the wind blew. 6 weeks before the disaster, they planned a getaway to the Cosmopolitan in Las Vegas. Cecilia asked if I was okay with it, and I said yes. Why wouldn't I be?
Thing. I trusted her.
I was scheduled to be in Denver for a 3-day inspection during that same time frame. Then the red flags started appearing, one after another. She kept asking if I would be weird about her going,
Fectin.
insisting that I just needed to trust her. It was her way of preemptively silencing any objections. Then came the crash diet and the obsession with expensive outfits we couldn't afford. She wanted to be the most aesthetic one in the group photos. Then, the phone, tilting, the leaving the room every time she got a text, the flinching whenever I walked past her. Not a paranoid man,
Fumo.
but even a blind person could have seen the shift in her energy.
But on that Wednesday
Before the trip, I used 300,000 of my own hard-earned airline points to book her flight. I kissed her goodbye at the airport on Thursday,
thanked.
truly believing she deserved a break. I even fantasized about picking her up on Spunsy with flowers, but Friday night changed everything. Around 11 p.m. Mountain Time, my phone started buzzing relentlessly. At first,
Few tanks.
I thought it was an emergency at work. Instead, I found links sent by 5 different people, all pointing to Aurora's Instagram live. I clicked the link. There they were. The music was deafening, the lights were strobing,
Seen the alcohol.
was flowing like water. Aurora was narrating the entire scene as if it were a high-end show. And here we have Cecilia, absolutely living her best life. Aurora shouted, pivoting the camera.
Fuse depth.
The lens zoomed in on Cecilia, who was dancing with a man I had never seen in my life. He had his hands all over her, and she looked completely intoxicated. He was wearing a dress I had never seen before, something expensive and revealing. Cecilia looked straight into the camera lens and laughed. "I'm off the clock and off the leash," she declared, her eyes glassy and wild.
They don't care. Who's watching?
The camera panned over to Grace, who cheered in the background. "What happens in Vegas, right?" Grace added, followed by the sound of glass clinking. Then,
Feel.
Cecilia turned back to the stranger and began making out with him, her body pressed firmly against his. I watched for 2 minutes before I closed the app. I didn't feel anger. I felt a cold, mechanical sense of clarity.
Reddit.
I logged into the airline system and canceled her return ticket. Then, I turned off my phone and slept for 8 hours. The next morning, I woke up to dozens of missed calls from Cecilia and her friends.
Answer any of them.
I finished my inspection in Denver, filed my reports, and grabbed a flight to a different city, me hometown. It wasn't until Sunday night that I finally looked at my messages.
Cecilia.
Was in a total panic. She was stranded in Vegas, and the group chat messages, which had been forwarded to me by a concerned friend who was also in Vegas, told the full story. The girls were arguing.
Fusing.
Aurora was complaining about the drama, and Grace was trying to blame me for being controlling by canceling the ticket. But the real twist came in a text from Becca to the group. He canceled the card too.
You.
The one, linked to the hotel room deposit, were getting kicked out. Cecilia's response was chilling. I don't care about the money. I just need to get back, so I can lie about what happened before he sees the footage.
Fanu screenshotted everything.
I didn't just cancel her flight. I had frozen the joint account she was using for their Vegas spending spree. When I returned to our apartment on Monday, he was waiting outside with a suitcase and tears in her eyes. She looked small, exhausted, and desperate. Cole, please, she started, grabbing my arm. It was just a joke, a stupid game for social media. It didn't mean anything.
Thinkst.
I looked at her, and for the first time in 4 years, I felt absolutely nothing. The video is already downloaded, Cecilia, I said, my voice steady. And the screenshots of the group chat where you plan to gaslight me?
Megan.
Those are already on their way to your parents and your job. Her face went pale. You wouldn't, she whispered. You're not a victim, Cecilia, I replied, stepping back. You're just an employee who forgot their shift is over.
Vexed.
I dropped her key on the porch. The locks are changed. Your things are in the garage. Don't call me again. She started to scream, but I had already turned my back. I walked inside and locked the door behind me.
Justice isn't always loud.
Sometimes it's just the sound of a deadbolt clicking into place. I sat on the couch, opened a book, and for the first time in a long time, I finally felt at peace. This is a dramatic,
high-stakes
storytelling script designed for a YouTube narration. It follows your structure, constraints, and emotional beats. My hands were trembling, but not because of rage. It was a hollow,
freezing sensation.
The kind you feel when your entire reality shifts on its axis. I stared at my phone screen, the blue light reflecting in my pupils, as the Instagram Live played out in real time. There she was. Cecilia.
You.
The woman who kissed me goodbye at the airport just 2 days ago, promising she'd be back by Sunday. She was in a club in Las Vegas, laughing, her hair messy, her skin flushed.
He was pressed against some random guy
I had never seen in my life. It wasn't just a quick peck, it was an act performed for the camera. And there in the background I heard them, Aurora and Grace, her best friends.
Hicks.
Giggling and narrating the spectacle like they were watching a movie. Look at her go! Aurora shouted into the microphone of her phone. The comment section was a waterfall of fire emojis and cruel jokes. Wait,
isn't she dating someone? Someone typed.
Who cares? Grace replied in the chat, her username popping up immediately. He's too obsessed with discipline anyway. Tonight, she's off the clock. My heart hammered against my ribs.
347 people were watching.
My coworkers, our shared friends, people who had sat at our dinner table just weeks prior. They weren't just watching her cheat. They were laughing at me.
Fission.
They wanted me to lose it. They wanted me to flood the chat with rage so Cecilia could play the victim, painting me as the controlling, toxic boyfriend who couldn't handle a girl's night out. I didn't send a single text. I didn't leave a single comment. I didn't scream, even though every muscle in my body was begging for release. I sat in that hotel room in Denver, the silence of the night pressing against my ears.
You know my airline account.
I looked at the flight reservation for her return trip. Off the clock, she said. Fine. I clicked cancel. The screen refreshed instantly. Booking canceled. Points refunded. She wasn't coming home on my dime. I spent the next hour working through a systematic destruction of our digital life. Shared Netflix account? Gone. Spotify family plan removed. Her name on my car insurance?
Things.
Scheduled a call for Monday morning to scrub it off. I was cutting the cords, one by one, with the clinical precision of a surgeon. By Saturday morning, I was already back home. I had lied to my supervisor about a family emergency which, considering the betrayal, felt like the truth. I landed, walked into my apartment, and immediately set up the Ring camera I'd ordered.
Phew.
I needed to see what happened when she finally crawled back. My phone had been on airplane mode for hours. The moment I turned it back on, the notifications crashed in like a wave. Dot 47 missed calls.
62 texts. Cole, my card is declined. Why are you doing this?
You can't leave me stranded here. Answer the phone. This isn't funny. Not a single "I'm sorry." Not a single shred of remorse. Just the panicked fuse entitled. Screeching of someone who had suddenly realized their safety net had been burned. Sunday night, I sat in the living room surrounded by 12 boxes, all labeled, all packed, every single piece of her life neatly contained.
Phone rang.
It wasn't Cecilia. It was Patricia, her mother. I hesitated, then answered. Cole, she said, her voice heavy with fatigue. Cecilia called me. She told me you left her in Vegas.
Phone tight.
She told you why? She did, Patricia sighed. And frankly, Cole, I'm disappointed in her. Not you. The room felt colder. What do you mean? This isn't the first time, Cole. She's done this before.
Time and time again.
She burns people who actually care about her. I was hoping she'd grown up, but I suppose she never will. The revelation hit me harder than the video. I wasn't the first, and I wouldn't be the last.
Bing.
I was just the latest victim of a cycle I hadn't been warned about. I didn't argue. I didn't ask for explanations. I simply thanked her and hung up. On Monday,
Beam.
when Cecilia finally managed to scrape together enough money to fly home and showed up at my door, she looked disheveled and desperate. She had her key in her hand, ready to barge in and start her usual drama.
He stopped.
The front door was locked tight, and there, sitting right outside in the hallway, were 12 boxes. I opened the door just a crack not enough to let her in, just enough to be heard. The locks are changed,
Thea said.
my voice steady, devoid of the hurt it felt days before. Everything you own is in those boxes. Don't call me. Don't contact me. Cole, wait, she started, her voice cracking. I didn't wait. I didn't yell.
Phew.
I just closed the door and heard the lock click. For the first time in years, the house was mine again. The silence wasn't lonely anymore. It was peace. And for the first time,
Finally felt like I was back on the clock. The clock of my own life.
I stood there in the lobby of my office building, watching the woman who had shared my life for 4 years crumble into a heap of desperate, mascara-streaked sobs.
Fusion.
4 years of building a home, planning a future, and trusting her with my absolute silence, all reduced to a public spectacle. She thought her tears would be the key to opening the door I had already bolted shut,
He didn't know.
that I had already seen the truth behind the curtains. She didn't know that the drunk mistake she claimed was actually a carefully rehearsed production. My name is Cole,
Vent.
and this is how I learned that some people don't just break your heart, they write a script to destroy your reputation while they're at it.
Dot.
The security guard buzzed me, his voice sounding apologetic through the intercom. Cole,
Fugzub.
there's a woman in the lobby. She's making quite a scene. I didn't need to ask who it was. When I stepped off the elevator, the sight of Cecilia's suitcase in hand, looking like a tragic actress in a low-budget drama, hit me like a physical blow. She spotted me immediately, her face contorting into that familiar look of performative agony.
Cole. Oh, thank God. I've been trying to reach you everywhere.
She lunged forward. But I took a sharp step back, my expression as cold as the glass walls surrounding us. We shouldn't be doing this here. Cecilia. The office staff were watching,
Eve.
whispering behind their monitors, their eyes glued to the scene. She grabbed my sleeve, her fingers trembling with a practiced fragility. Please, just 5 minutes. I'm lost. I have nowhere to go. And I'm so sorry about Vegas.
Just a stupid, drunken mistake.
I felt a ghost of a memory. The 4 years we spent flicker in my chest, but then I remembered the video. I remembered the way she had looked at that camera.
Fienty.
The way she had announced to the world that she was off the clock. You keep using the word mistake, Cecilia, but that implies an accident, I said, my voice cutting through the lobby's chatter. An accident is a stumble. What you did was a series of conscious, calculated choices. Her face flushed, the fake tears momentarily stalling. I was drunk. I wasn't in my right mind. You were coherent enough to film it, I countered.
Club.
You chose to dance. You chose to make a mockery of us for your followers. She pulled back, her eyes narrowing as the mask began to slip. You're being cruel, Cole. You left me there with no money, no way home.
Support. I could have been hurt.
You had 3 friends with you, I reminded her. Where were they when you needed help? She scoffed, a bitter, sharp sound. Grace disappeared the second the bill hit.
Thing.
Aurora was too busy capturing the perfect angle for her story. Becca was useless. I was completely alone. Sounds like you chose your company poorly, I said, and you made your choices. Now you have to live with the consequences. She tried one last time, her voice dropping to a seductive, soft whisper. I love you, Cole. Can't. We just go home and forget this happened. The apartment isn't your home anymore, I said, turning toward the elevator.
Packed your belongings.
You can retrieve them on Friday through the building manager. Don't call me again. I didn't wait for her to scream. I didn't wait for her to apologize again. I walked away, feeling a strange,
Follow sense of clarity.
That night, I sat in living room surrounded by cardboard box the graveyard of a 4-year relationship.
My phone buzzed.
It was Becca. The text was short, vibrating with a nervous energy.
Can we talk?
There is something you need to know about Vegas. Against my better judgment, I agreed to meet her the following day. The coffee shop was quiet.
Bizang.
The smell of roasted beans doing nothing to settle the knot in my stomach. Becca sat across from me, looking like a woman who had been carrying a lead weight in her chest.
He didn't speak.
She just slid her phone across the table. The screen displayed a group chat titled Vegas Escape. I scrolled through the messages, and with every swipe, the ground beneath me felt less stable. Weeks before the trip, Grace had been the architect of the chaos. Cecilia, you need to stop letting Cole control your fun. You're allowed to be free. What happens in Vegas stays in Vegas, Cecilia had replied. Then,
The night of the club.
Aurora had typed. Going live in 5. Cecilia, you ready? Cecilia's reply sent a chill down my spine. Yeah, let's do it. Content is content. I pushed the phone back, my hands shaking. They scripted it.
Thing.
I whispered, the realization tasting like ash. It wasn't a mistake. It was a production. Becca looked down at her coffee, her voice barely a murmur. It gets worse, Cole. They are framing you.
There. Telling everyone.
You're an abusive, controlling psycho who trapped her and abandoned her in Vegas. My work in aviation safety requires a spotless reputation.
This narrative's
Gained traction if they painted me as unstable. It wouldn't just cost me my relationship. It could cost me my career. I pulled up Instagram on my own phone. Aurora's latest post was already up.
Finked.
A picture of a sad-looking Cecilia with a caption about escaping toxic chains and men who fear powerful women.
Dot.
The comments section was a swarm of righteous anger, with people tagging my accounts, calling me names. I couldn't even repeat. But they had made one massive, fatal error. They assumed I was just a victim. They didn't realize that in my line of work, I live and die by documentation. Reached into my bag and pulled out my laptop. You think they can ruin me? I asked, looking at Becca. They forgot one thing. I don't just feel things, Becca. I keep records. I opened a file containing every email, every location ping from that night, and the transcript of the video where they bragged about the content. They wanted a story? I said, my voice cold and focused. Then I'm going to give the world the full unedited version.
Friday morning.
The building manager called to say Cecilia was at the lobby, ready to collect her things. I didn't go down. Instead, I sent an email to the entire group, including Grace, Aurora, and Cecilia.
Thing.
I attached the full video of their planning session, the chat logs, and a letter from my legal counsel regarding the defamation campaign they were launching.
Dot. I hit send.
10 minutes later, the lobby was silent. Cecilia left the boxes behind. She didn't try to knock on my door. She knew that if she took another step, the truth would be on every newsfeed she cared about. I sat in my apartment, the silence no longer hollow.
Emailed.
It was the quiet of a storm that had passed, leaving the ground clean. I poured a cup of coffee, watched the sun rise over the city, And finally, for the first time in 4 years, I felt entirely perfectly free.
Trap was set.
And I could see the strings pulling from every direction. I stared at my phone, the screen glowing with a notification that Cecilia was playing the victim once again. I opened Instagram, and there it was, a long
Performative post.
from Aurora, rambling about toxic relationships and men who were too fragile to handle strong, independent women. She hadn't mentioned my name, but the subtext was loud enough to wake the neighbors.
Finch.
The comments section was a battlefield. Some people were eating it up like gospel, while others were actually calling her out for enabling a serial cheater. They aren't finished yet, Becca whispered through the phone,
Vet.
her voice shaking slightly. They're planning an ambush at your place this Friday, the moment Cecilia comes to grab the rest of her things. I felt my jaw tighten. Grace convinced them that if they all show up together, they can corner you, pressure you, and force a reconciliation that you can't say no to. That's not going to happen, I said, my voice cold. I know, Becca replied, a moment of hesitation hanging in the air.
Egan.
I had to tell you.
What are you going to do, Cole?
They're actively destroying your reputation. Everyone is starting to believe their version of the truth. I took a deep breath, looking out the window at the city lights.
You.
Part of me wanted to unleash everything to post the screenshots, thus timestamps, and the group chat logs that proved exactly how calculating, cold and staged this entire betrayal had been. But then I realized, stooping to their level would only validate their chaotic reality. Nothing, I finally said. The truth doesn't need a PR campaign. The people who truly know me already know the reality. As for the rest,
Opinions have no value.
Becca let out a long, shaky breath. For what it's worth, I'm sorry. I should have spoken up in Vegas. I should have told Cecilia how insane this was. I was just terrified of them. Yeah.
I replied softly.
Before we hung up, she sent me every single screenshot from their group chat. I saved them into a folder simply labeled Vegas, tucked away for a rainy day. We talked for another 10 minutes.
Egan.
And she confirmed that the internal collapse had already begun. Grace was already throwing Cecilia under the bus, calling her weak and disowning her as a friend. Aurora had pivoted to a healing era persona,
Thing.
posting content about growth while conveniently ignoring the fact that she had literally filmed and narrated the entire affair. Cecilia was crashing at Grace's place, which sounded like a recipe for a disaster I was no longer part of. Thursday morning, I loaded 12 boxes into my car and drove to Cecilia's parents' home. Patricia, her mother, had texted me the day before, asking me to drop everything there so they could ensure Cecilia got her things without any more confrontation. I arrived around 10 a.m. Patricia was waiting on the porch, face lined with an exhaustion that went deeper than just this week. Cole, she said, her voice heavy. I'm so sorry. I nodded, not needing the apology. I spent the next hour hauling boxes into their garage, while her father, Robert, silently helped me with the heavy ones. Neither of them said much. There wasn't really anything left to say. When we finished, Patricia invited me inside for coffee. Cecilia called last night, Patricia said, her hands trembling slightly as she poured the coffee. She told us you refused to talk to her. That's the version she's selling herself, I replied, neutrally. Patricia sat down heavily, but before she could respond, Mia,
Thanks.
Cecilia's younger sister, walked into the room. I had only met Mia a few times, but she always felt like the one who saw everything the rest of the family chose to ignore. She sat down, took a sip of her coffee.
Friendly at me.
Cecilia did this exact same thing during her sophomore year, Mia said, her voice flat and devoid of emotion. A girl's trip to Cancun. She posted videos with some guy she met at the resort. Her boyfriend at the time was devastated. Mom and dad paid for couples therapy, paid for her flight home, and basically smoothed over every consequence until he took her back. Patricia looked down at her mug. Her silence, a quiet admission of guilt. We enabled it, Patricia whispered. We thought we were helping. Then she did it again with the next guy, Mia continued, turning to her parents. The Miami trip. Same pattern.
That guy was smarter, though. He didn't fall for it.
But again, you two covered her rent for months while she played the victim of a broken heart. Robert looked up, his eyes weary.
Vixen.
We raised a daughter who learned that consequences are just suggestions, he admitted. The weight of their confession hit me harder than any of the insults Cecilia had thrown my way. Patricia looked at me.
Tears welling in her eyes.
She called us, begging us to convince you to give her one more chance, she said. We told her no, if this is going to be fixed, it has to come from her, not through us.
It can't be fixed,
I said.
Voice steady.
This wasn't a mistake. It was a calculated series of choices. We know, Robert said, standing up, and for what it's worth, you deserve better than what our daughter gave you. That was the end of it.
Viewed that.
I left their home with a strange, hollow sense of peace, knowing exactly who she was and exactly where she had learned it. That night, the smear campaign reached a fever pitch. Grace was posting about supporting friends through trauma, implying that I was the source of that trauma. Aurora began a series of stories about identifying red flags in abusive partners,
Carefully painting me as the villain of her twisted story.
Cecilia finally posted a quote about narcissists making you question your reality. My phone was flooded with messages from mutual friends, some worried, some curious.
I'm just looking for the latest gossip.
I ignored them all, except for a few select people who genuinely mattered to them. I sent one simple message. If you need to ask if I'm abusive,
You don't know me well enough for me to explain.
Friday arrived. The plan was simple. The building superintendent would let Cecilia in to grab her remaining things while I stayed safely at work.
Thing about these people was ever simple.
Around 2 p.m., my phone rang. Mr. Cole, the super asked, his voice stressed. We have a situation. Cecilia isn't alone. Who is with her? I asked, already knowing the answer.
Grace.
Aurora and another woman. They're demanding entry. They're making a scene in the lobby. I sighed, pinching the bridge of my nose. They weren't here for belongings, were they? The super asked. No, I said.
Fear. To put on a show.
They're threatening to call the police if I don't let them up. I thought about it for a second. They had scripted this drama, planned the performance, and were waiting for me to panic.
Tell them it'll be there in
30 minutes, I said. A dangerous calm washing over me. And tell them we'll talk in the lobby. I'm inviting witnesses. I left work early and called Becca on the way.
Still want to do the right thing?
I asked. What do you mean? She stammered. I mean, are you ready to show them that the story is changing? I walked into the lobby, phone recording.
Ready to end this charade once and for all.
Hey, Reddit, you won't believe the drama I had to deal with today. Finally sitting down to type this out because my hands are still shaking from the confrontation. Some of you might remember the story I shared about my ex, Cecilia, and how she completely blew up our 4-year relationship for the sake of her content creator friends. Well, it didn't end there. Today, they decided to show up at my building, demanding access to my apartment to collect her things. I knew exactly what this was. A trap. I told the concierge to let them into the lobby, but I made it clear.
One is coming up to my floor.
I headed home early, my pulse racing, and made one final call to Becca, who had been the quietest one in their little inner circle. Are you still going to do the right thing? I asked her. My voice low and steady. What do you mean? She whispered, sounding terrified. Bring the group chat screenshots, I replied. Every single one of them. Not playing their social media games.
And definitely not letting them run a circus in my lobby.
There was a long silence, then a heavy sigh. Grace is going to completely lose her mind. Good, I said, and hung up. 20 minutes later, I walked into the lobby. It was a scene straight out of a trashy reality show. Cecilia looked pale and anxious, probably wondering if I'd actually press charges. Aurora was already holding her phone up,
Streaming live on Instagram.
her eyes darting around for the best angle. Grace stood in the center, arms crossed, looking like she was ready to tear the building down just to win an argument. Becca stood apart from them.
Clutching her purse like a lifeline.
I gestured toward the seating area, keeping my tone cold. We can talk here. Grace immediately stepped forward, her voice sharp enough to cut glass. We aren't doing this in public.
Speak.
Cole, this is a private matter between you and Cecilia. I let out a dry laugh. Nothing about this has been private since you decided to broadcast our breakup to thousands of strangers. You chose an audience, Grace.
E1.
Now you have one. Aurora clicked her tongue, her camera never wavering, recording this for my own protection. Record everything, I replied, stepping into the frame. Make sure you don't miss a second of this.
Ija.
The doorman kept his head down, desperately trying to look busy, though I knew he was hanging on every word. I looked straight at Cecilia. So, what exactly did you forget?
Hooper, you had essential items to collect. Name them.
Cecilia blinked, caught off guard. She looked at Grace for a cue, but Grace was busy trying to salvage her own reputation. That's not the point, Cole.
To get us here. You're acting like a villain, and Cecilia just wants closure.
I turned to the doorman. Oh. For the record, I said, my voice echoing in the marble lobby. Cecilia started to cry. Those practiced.
Perfect tears.
Cole, please. I messed up. I know I hurt you, but 4 years. 4 years has to mean something. I love you. You don't love me, Cecilia, I said, feeling a strange sense of clarity.
The comfort I gave you.
You love the stability you threw away for a few likes. Grace tried to cut in again, but I wasn't having it. You abandoned her in Vegas. Grace, you know how dangerous that was.
Freedom.
Aurora chirped from behind the camera. Dangerous is going live with strangers and calling it find yourself. I shot back. Grace's face turned a deep, ugly shade of red.
Thanks, Shin.
I looked directly at the lens. Keep recording, Aurora. This is the part where the truth comes out. I nodded to Becca. She took a shaky breath and pulled out her phone. Becca, what are you doing? Grace hissed.
Her composure finally cracking.
Showing him the truth, Becca said, her voice stronger than I'd ever heard it. She walked over and handed me her phone. I didn't even look at the screen.
Handed it straight to Cecilia.
Read it out loud, I commanded. I can't, Cecilia stammered. Read the group chat. The one from before Vegas. Read exactly what Grace and Aurora told you to do.
Thing.
The room went deathly silent. Grace lunged forward, her mask finally slipping. Becca, don't you dare. After everything we've done for you, we included you when no one else wanted you. You didn't include me, Becca shouted.
Pulling off the walls.
You used me as a camera operator while you destroyed a man's life just for content.
That's not friendship.
That's exploitation. Aurora's hand was shaking now, the phone wobbling.
This is being taken out of context,
she yelled. Then let's add the context, I said. I pulled out my own phone and began reading from the screenshots. Becca had sent me the night before.
Thing.
What happens in Vegas stays in Vegas. Don't tell him everything. Own your freedom. If he can't handle it, that's his problem. I looked up, meeting Grace's panicked eyes. This was planned. Every single move. The live.
Frail. The performance.
You weren't helping her. Find herself you were helping her burn her life down for views. Grace was spiraling, her manager persona completely shattered. You're twisting this!
Supporting our friend.
Dot. You were encouraging her to cheat and blaming me for the fallout, I said. Grace turned on Becca, her voice venomous. Becca, you need to stick to the story.
Speak on.
The words hung in the air, damning and clear. Stick to the story. A literal admission of a manufactured narrative. I smiled, a cold, empty feeling in my chest. Did you hear that, Aurora? Is the camera still running?
Feel.
Aurora lowered her phone, realizing she had just recorded the downfall of her own group. Cecilia was sitting on the lobby bench,
Fancy.
staring at the phone in her hands as if she were seeing the reality of her life for the first time. Maybe she finally realized she was never the main character in their world. She was just the props department.
Keeping the recording.
Aurora muttered, trying to regain some shred of power. Good, I said. Post it, all of it. It doesn't change the fact that you're all frauds. I stood up and faced Cecilia.
Is at your parents' house.
I've documented everything, and if I see any of you near this building again, I'm filing a restraining order for harassment. Cecilia tried to reach for me, but I stepped back. We're done.
Cecilia. Accept it. Move on.
I walked to the elevator, my back straight. Behind me, I could hear them fighting Grace, screaming at Becca, Aurora crying about the algorithm, and Cecilia just sobbing.
Fagnun.
The elevator doors closed, cutting off the noise, and for the first time in weeks, I could breathe. I got back to my apartment and just stood in the silence. It was finally over, or so I thought. Around 11 p.m.,
Figs.
my doorbell ring camera chimed. I checked the app, and there they were, Cecilia, Grace, and Aurora, all of them, stumbling drunk, staring up at my door,
Feed.
wondering why the real world doesn't work like their curated Instagram feed. I didn't answer. I just hit block on all of them, sat down, and finally truly slept.
Fact.
The notification on my ring camera didn't take long to arrive. It was 11 p.m. when the alert pinged, pulling me away from a quiet evening. I opened the app, and there they were, standing in the dim hallway light. Cecilia.
Grace and Aurora.
They were clearly intoxicated, swaying unsteadily as they crowded the frame. Grace began pounding her fists against my door with frantic energy. Cole, open up this door right now.
You.
We aren't going anywhere until you come out and give us an explanation. The thudding continued, relentless and aggressive. Cecilia leaned her forehead against the doorframe, sobbing loudly for effect. Aurora was right there.
Thanks it.
Phone raised, capturing every frame of the spectacle. Even in this moment of total humiliation, she was still trying to turn my life into viral content. I sat on my sofa in the shadows, watching them through the screen.
Refusing to give them the reaction they craved.
This is absolutely ridiculous, Grace shouted, her voice rising in pitch as the alcohol fueled her ego. You can't just hide in there like a coward. Bang! Bang! Bang!
You.
Suddenly, a neighbor's door creaked open down the hall. An older man, looking exhausted in his bathrobe, stepped out. Hey, keep it down out there. Some of us are trying to sleep. Grace spun around.
Fingzhou.
Her eyes sharp with defensive venom. Doc, mind your own business, old man. I'm calling the building manager immediately. The supervisor arrived 10 minutes later, his face tight with clear annoyance.
Yushin.
I had already messaged him earlier that day, requesting that these specific people be barred from entering the building. Grace immediately shifted into her manager voice, trying to manipulate the situation.
Vent.
Aurora waved her phone in the air, loudly claiming they were merely documenting harassment. The supervisor stood his ground, unfazed by their theatrics. Ladies, you need to leave the premises right now.
Fact, or I am calling the police.
Grace tried to argue, but the supervisor pulled out his phone, ready to make the call. This is your last chance. They finally turned to leave, but Grace couldn't resist one last parting shot. She spun back toward my door, screaming,
You are going to regret this, Cole.
I watched them stumble toward the elevator, Aurora still filming, still searching for a narrative that fit their twisted view of reality.
15.
The neighbor who had complained earlier had also filmed the entire pathetic display on his own phone. The next morning, it was all over the building's group chat. 15 messages,
Views.
all mocking the drunk women who had caused a scene at midnight. No one mentioned me by name, but the message was loud and clear. Their chaos had created its own evidence. I sent a quick text to the supervisor.
Anyone from that group shows up again.
Call security immediately.
Don't call me.
Then, I sent a single final message to Cecilia's number. Do not come here again. I blocked her before the message even finished sending.
Fit, it was done.
2 months slipped by in a blur of productivity. I refocused on my career and threw myself back into my fitness routine.
Isn't.
I began reconnecting with friends I had drifted away from during the toxicity of that relationship. I even started seeing a woman named River, whom I met at the gym. It wasn't anything serious yet, but it was honest, easy.
Refreshing.
Life was finally moving forward. The fallout for them, however, was swift. In a small city, that lobby clip traveled like wildfire. It flooded group chats, professional networks, and local circles.
You do that.
Aurora's attempt to paint herself as a victim backfired when people saw how Grace had forced the narrative. Grace started losing her event clients, one cancellation spiraling into another.
You that.
Aurora's healing content was ruthlessly roasted in the comments. Becca sought out therapy. Cecilia went dark for 3 weeks, then resurfaced, posting single girl content. Her captions were full of buzzwords about narcissists. She never mentioned Vegas. She never once took accountability for the wreckage she left behind, and then everything came back around on a quiet Thursday night. It was 9 p.m. when my Ring camera sent an alert.
The app.
Expecting a Latin night delivery. Instead, I saw Cecilia. She was alone, this time, no entourage, no cameras. She was dressed up, hair and makeup perfect,
Jinx.
holding a box of the expensive boutique chocolates I used to love. She knocked softly, a gentle rhythmic sound that lacked the desperation of the previous visit. She waited. She knocked again.
Faked.
I watched her through the lens for a long time. She looked nervous, constantly checking her reflection in her phone screen to ensure her hair was just right. Finally, she looked directly into the camera. Cole,
You're in there.
please, I'm begging you. Just 5 minutes. I walked to the door, but I didn't unlock it. There is nothing left to talk about, I said, my voice steady through the wood. Please, she whispered.
Her voice cracking.
I brought your favorites. I just want to show you I'm serious. About us. About trying again. There is no us, Cecilia. There could be, she insisted, tears streaming down her face now.
Thinking about what we had.
About our future. I talked to my parents and they think if we did couples therapy, we could fix this. She took a shaky breath and maybe we should just get married.
The engagement. Just do it and start fresh.
I almost laughed out loud. Marriage doesn't cure a broken character, Cecilia.
What?
You think a wedding just magically fixes what you did. That's not how the world works.
Made one mistake. One mistake in 4 years.
Doesn't that count for something? It wasn't a mistake, I countered, my voice hardening. You planned it. You chose it. You celebrated it.
Fix.
And then you had the nerve to blame me for having boundaries. Through the camera, I saw her face crumble. She set the chocolates down in front of the door. So, that's it. You won't even try. There is nothing left to try for.
Thing to regret this, Cole. When you realize what you gave up.
Not giving anything up. Choosing myself. There was a heavy, suffocating silence. Can you at least open the door?
Me in the eye. When you say that. No.
I watched her stand there for another minute, hoping for a flicker of change, a sign that she finally understood. But when the door remained locked, she picked up the chocolates,
Finyute.
hesitated, set them back down, and then picked them up again. Finally, she just left them on the floor and walked away. I watched until her silhouette disappeared down the hallway.
You.
The box of chocolates sat there for an hour before I opened the door, picked them up, and dropped them directly into the trash chute. It wasn't out of spite. I just didn't want them in my home. Friday morning, Patricia called me. Cecilia tried to see you last night, she said quietly. Yeah, she did. She wanted to reconcile. Even brought up marriage. Patricia sighed, a sound of profound relief mixed with exhaustion. She called me afterward.
He said.
You wouldn't even open the door.
I didn't.
Good, Patricia replied firmly. Robert and I wanted you to know we're done enabling her. We paid for her therapy, but we aren't paying her rent or bailing her out anymore.
She needs to face the reality of what she did.
I appreciate you saying that, Patricia. You were good to her, Cole. Better than she ever deserved. We said our goodbyes, and I sat there for a while.
You.
Reflecting on how an entire life can collapse into something as small as a closed door and a box of chocolates in the trash. Saturday afternoon, I was at River's place when my phone buzzed with a message from Aurora.
Screenshot of a
Where Grace was talking about fixing things once I got lonely enough. I deleted the message without responding. Their drama was no longer my problem. Sunday, River came over to my apartment.
food. Settled in for a movie. And eventually fell asleep on the couch.
When I woke up a while later, she was in the kitchen making coffee. She turned around, saw me, and flashed a genuine, soft smile.
Chaos of the past was gone.
And for the first time in a long time, the future felt completely, perfectly mine. The drama was no longer my cross to bear. Sunday River walked through my front door.
Bringing a sense of peace I hadn't felt in months.
We ordered Italian food, found a movie that felt like home, and eventually drifted off to sleep on the sofa. When I woke up in the quiet glow of the morning, she was already in the kitchen brewing coffee, offering me a soft smile that made the world feel right again. In that silence, my mind drifted to Cecilia one final time. I thought about the chaos in Vegas
Toxic Instagram Live.
and every calculated move that followed. I pictured the doorstep, the cold barrier of that closed door, and the weight of the lies they tried to build against me. But then, I simply let it go.
Fusey.
It wasn't about anger or crafting a dramatic statement to prove a point. I just watched the memory drift away like smoke, clearing the headspace for something real to take root. Staying calm was my greatest defense. It was the invisible shield that stopped me from doing anything reckless. While Cecilia panicked, scrambling to patch up the holes in her stories, I held my ground. I remained disciplined
Firm lines in the sand.
and sat back to watch their house of cards inevitably fall apart. There is a profound lesson in this, one I hope you all take to heart. Sometimes,
Bean.
the most powerful move you can make is simply refusing to play the game at all. Guys, we are hovering right on the edge of hitting 100,000 subscribers on this channel
You have been watching.
and haven't hit that button yet.
Please consider subscribing today.
It genuinely helps us reach that milestone and keeps this community growing.
You know.
Thank you for being the reason this dream is becoming a reality.